I'm really honored to have on my channel today a new friend. I haven't met him in real life at all, but I've had a fair bit of correspondence with him, and think I've gotten some YouTube comments from him. His name is Caleb Richardson, and Caleb holds the distinction of having sent me the most successful, the highest number of successful false friend propositions. Does that make sense? He sent me examples of false friends that he has discovered, and I get these on a somewhat regular basis, and they're not always actually false friends. I do write people back, and I don't just pretend that they are false friends when they're not. I tell people, no, I don't think that one really is a good example. But Caleb has sent me a number of them that I've now got carefully filed away. Maybe someday I'll make videos on them. And after I got another two that were just excellent, I thought, we've got to have Caleb on the channel to talk through this. And so I'm going to have Caleb talk us through two false friends that he discovered and demonstrate I'm not the only one who does this sort of thing, and you can too. You can use the methods that I've tried to popularize to discover in the King James Version words that you previously didn't know that you didn't know. You can verify what they mean, and you can read the King James Version with understanding. Catch these false friends. We're going to talk about two of them. We're going to talk about condemn, and then later entreat. And in the middle, I'm going to ask Caleb to tell us a little bit more about his personal story, having been raised in a King James only church, actually one of the most prominent ones in the U.S. You're going to find out about that. And now the story of him leaving the doctrine of King James onlyism, or doctrines plural perhaps, is also, I think, instructive. So Caleb, let me have you just introduce yourself real quick. Thanks for coming on the channel. How and where do you serve the body of Christ? Where's your family? What's it like? What do you do for work?
Mark, it's really an honor to meet you, and you're really kind to keep up the correspondence and reply back to folks who send you stuff, and I've really enjoyed that. I live in Michigan City, Indiana, right on the shores of Lake Michigan and the border of Michigan and Indiana, and I have a wife, Cassie, and three beautiful daughters. We attend church here in Michigan City, and I work up in Michigan as a data analyst and a medical record administrator.
And your dad is your pastor?
Yeah, that's right. Here in Michigan City, we attend a Baptist church. My dad's the pastor, and that's been just a huge blessing to attend church where my dad is the pastor. I teach adult Sunday school there. I'm a deacon, and we have a great congregation of just lovely Christians.
Fantastic. You know, the point here of all the stuff that I do on the channel is ultimately to serve the church and, of course, individual Christians within the church. And I just had a great lunch with somebody at Detroit, the dean of the seminary there, Ben Edwards, a longtime acquaintance, now friend, who was just encouraging me again to make sure to do what I'm only too eager to do, and that is to keep the church at the center of what I'm up to. So I really appreciate and love to hear about people's church involvement. Okay, you know what? You're going to take over. I have done my job enough. Now other people can do it. Tell us about the word condemn.
Yeah, let's see if I can make you regret this. So the word condemn, I came across as preparing for my adult Sunday school class that I get to teach. We've been walking through Chronicles, which is it's just been a great study and really a theological history of the people of Israel, and especially Judah. And I came nearly, to the very end of the book, and along the way we found a couple false friends, I think, within Chronicles. And this one jumped out to me as I was studying. I was reading the King James. We use the King James in our church, but I was also reading other modern versions, and I found that they used a different word here than the word condemn. So I'll read you the context. This is 2 Chronicles 36:3, and it's talking about.
Let me pause you for 1 second, Caleb, and this is excellent. We'll get to the context. So we're at step one here. You have noticed a possible, what do I even call it? Can you remember how do I word this?
Well, there's contextual conflict.
Yes.
And that's not how I picked it up. That's a little bit how I picked it up, but it was also comparing modern versions. So the context doesn't quite make sense.
Exactly. At that first step, thank you for telling me my own process. I just couldn't remember the two. That first step can either be one or the other or both, where you notice that modern versions and the King James don't seem to cohere, or you notice just within the King James this word doesn't seem to quite make sense, it doesn't fit, or both. And are
Yep.
you saying it was both for you?
It was, yeah. I don't have training in the biblical languages, so checking modern versions would be how I would see them, or just contextual conflict within the English of the King James. And I'd say it's probably both. I familiarized myself with the passage usually by reading a modern version first, usually a functional translation, and then I will go back and read the King James and more literal translations, and so I noticed this word at that point.
Excellent. So tell us about the context.
So this is 2 Chronicles 36th chapter, and the Pharaoh is coming back from a battle, and he's coming back through Israel, through Judah, and he's kind of taking over. This is really God's judgment starting to come to the nation, and here he levies a fine on the country, as kings did back then when they took other kings as vassals in other countries. And the scripture says, and the king of Egypt put him down at Jerusalem, talking about the king of Judah, and condemned the land in 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And so that's the contextual conflict. How do you condemn land in currency, in money? It sounded to me like condemn is usually more, either you're condemning somebody to a really harsh punishment, like death or beheading is what the dictionaries give examples, or it's a kind of a judgment that you're making on their character.
Or when it comes to condemning land, you think of maybe this property is condemned. It's fallen into a derelict state, and therefore
Exactly.
the state has had to condemn. But that doesn't make sense. He condemned, like in that context, like the whole land of Israel in
Right.
a certain set of monetary values. It should leap out to anybody who's followed these methods of mine, which aren't only mine. They're just kind of the standard methods of exegesis and lexicography, dictionary, finding out word meanings. You should be thinking, wow, that doesn't make sense. Something is going on here. And the possibility that it's the archaic English of the King James, rather than an error in the King James or some kind of change in the modern versions, that possibility ought to occur to people. So it occurred to you. What did you do next?
So next I looked it up in some in the responsible original language tools that I have. I use Logos Bible software. I don't have Halot or Chalot, but I think I have the built-in tool, I suppose, that they use, and it's worked pretty well, at least for the limited language study that I'm able to do with my training. And it said that this word means a tribute or a tax, which makes more sense in the context of the rest of the verse.
So this Hebrew word, the Hebrew word being translated condemned, according to the dictionary and Logos, which I'm guessing is probably it's not Swanson in the Old Testament. It's the semantic domains one, I think, that comes with it. Can you remember exactly what, or can you call up what lexicon you were using? And by the way, Chalot and Halot is the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament and the concise Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. Those are expensive and high-level resources, a lot of difficulty in those, but you don't have to have that one to have a responsible one. Or maybe was it BDB? I don't know. What
BDB.
What was it?
Yeah, abridged
Okay.
BDB is what I have, yeah.
Brown Driver Briggs, abridged BDB. Yeah, that would be a responsible original language lexicon. It is one of a previous generation. And so I have not used BDB a ton because I've had Halot for so many years. My impression is that BDB doesn't tend to use evidence from cognate languages as much as does Halot. That was relevant for Job 17:6 when I did a video on that, where it's the one error I've posited in the King James Version. And the reason I was confident in that is that the related word in all these multiple related languages was, I believe, spit, rather than, I think, tabret it is in Job 17. When we have a word that's used very rarely or only once in the Hebrew Bible, it's important to be able to reach out to these other languages. So BDB, as I recall, doesn't do that as often, but it is still responsible and definitely useful. I'm glad you turned to it. And I know you're saving up for halot one of these days, and then you'll get to see those cognate languages. By the way, I can tell you this, Caleb. I can't say this to everybody, but you have earned the right. If you're ever desperate to see the halot entry for something, and just once or twice you just got to see it, just message me and let me just take a screenshot for you and see how you enjoy working through that. Okay, so you found kind of what you expected to find, that this Hebrew word has to mean something different, very like what the context practically demands. So that's step 2. Tell us about step 3.
Yeah, what the context demands and what every modern version had. They were all agreeing that this is a tax, this is a levy or a fine. So then I went to step 3, which is looking it up in a current English dictionary. And I have the one that comes free on the Mac, and then I have Merriam-Webster online, and actually Google partners with some Oxford company too, to provide definitions. And I just didn't see anything there that included a sense that I really felt matched. There wasn't, there's a lot of entries for condemn, or at least several, and some of them are similar, but there was nothing that really talked about a fine, taking money, and that kind of also lined up with what I expected from how I've heard the word used.
Right. So every English speaker, especially native English speaker, is some kind of lexicographer. You are listening to the way words get used. You're recognizing when it sounds funny. If we hear a British person refer to the boot, and we know they're talking about a part of their car, it doesn't make sense until we realize, oh, they use that word differently. We're talking about a historical form of English where your gut says, mine too, that sense doesn't work, but you're verifying this with contemporary dictionaries whose job it is to describe the current state of the language. And you're telling me not a single one of them had a sense for the word condemn that seemed to fit that context in Chronicles. Fantastic. And we don't need to spend any more time on that. I think most people get that just in their gut. They know that sounds funny. So step 4, what'd you do next?
So then I used an old dictionary, something that would represent English in the 1600s. And again, I don't have access to the OED. I have done a lot of hammering on the doors of libraries in my area and just haven't gotten access. But
good for you.
I can get, Webster's 1828 is online, and then I call and bug you, or I email you and bug you at that point. But I looked it up in Webster's 1828, and they did have a sense in that dictionary. There's a sense that matched, and it says, especially relating to a fine, charging a monetary fee from the word condemn. And so at that point, I was pretty confident that this must be a false friend, but we need the Oxford English Dictionary to really verify and say, is this an archaic or an old use?
Yeah, so recently I have, I did this video on my best opponent, Christopher Yetzer, and I don't always name names, when I'm interacting with people, but he deserves the honor, frankly, of me crediting him with some good work. And I was wondering out loud, why does he appeal to something other than the OED? He likes to go back to lexicons of early modern English. And it hit me after I made that video. It's because I think, I'm not trying to read his motives or anything, but the only thing I can think of is not just that those sources are current, because that can help, that's fine, but the OED editors would have had access to those lexicons too. It's that those lexicons they're not going to name then current senses. Let's say a dictionary came out in 1620. They're not going to name a then current sense as obsolete. So you don't have the awkward difficulty of finding the meaning of a given King James word and seeing right there, obsolete or archaic or occasionally formal or literary, but especially obsolete. And you're not going to have that with Webster's 1828 either, at least not as often, although he was fully aware of the changes in English and would name those in the beginning of his Webster Bible. In the intro, he talks about those. So that's excellent. And I was able to send this back to you, the OED screenshot, I think, and we confirmed together, yes, absolutely, this is a false friend. It's one where the contemporary meaning of the English word may trip you up. You may come to be thinking, okay, he condemned it like he made it derelict and therefore unfit for human habitation. It might mislead you. or it might just be meaningless. Like, what does that mean, to condemn some piece of land in a certain amount of money? The possibility definitely exists, however, that people will be misled, and therefore it is properly a false friend. So I wish I had some kind of like sound effect I could play right now. Ching, you win, you got a false friend. But I just loved it when I got this from you. And now let's turn to have you talk about why you're interested in this obscure field. My channel is a niche pleasure for people. I think I don't appeal to the vast majority of mankind and womankind, but those few people who are interested often have some kind of history with King James onlyism. And you do too. You've told me. Tell me, how did you encounter King James onlyism in your life growing up?
I grew up with King James onlyism. I grew up in First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana. And you can read a lot about that church online, but I will say I had a great experience there. I attended their school system through 10th grade and can really just say nothing but positive about the teachers that I had there, many godly teachers who I know loved me and prayed for me. I think about a man named Don Boyd who is now in heaven, but he prayed for his students every day, and you just knew going to school that he had prayed for you. Jeannie and Joe Hackett also. They, I think, graduated from Bob Jones and came and taught at our school, and they taught elementary kids music. My understanding of music was shaped by Jeannie Hackett as a kid. And so I am interested in King James onlyism because that was a focus at that church, and it was something that they held to and bound my conscience to the King James Version. But otherwise, I can only say good things, and I would be remiss to complain about the education and the love for God and the love for the scriptures that they gave me.
Right, excellent. And of course, I say the very same thing about my experience. And it's not a ploy like to get people to trust me. You could go meet these people and see for yourself, the ones who taught me. They were wonderful, godly people, and I'll never cease to be grateful for the things I learned, Latin and Spanish and science and math and history and all that good stuff, under the loving tutelage of people who were not abusive. But I have come to believe that they are wrong about some elements of Christian doctrine. That won't keep them out of heaven, and doesn't stop me from wanting to be their friends. And you apparently have come to the same place. What was your path out of King James only viewpoint?
Yeah, so like I said, my conscience was tied to the King James Version. It was the Bible. And even up into my adult years, I got married and started attending church where my dad pastors. And he actually brought up this topic kind of carefully and cautiously to me at one point after I was married. And I just wasn't ready to hear it. I was stubborn or just stuck and not interested in learning or diving into the details. And so I think we were standing in our kitchen, his kitchen, and I spat out Psalm 12, 6 and 7 at him and said, we have to have a perfect Bible, and it must be the King James, and that's it. That's the end of it. And he was so gracious, he didn't push the issue. He probably knew me because I'm his son and saw that I just wasn't ready to have this discussion. And he left it alone for years, maybe 10 years. He didn't make it an issue at church, in our family, still hasn't made it a big issue. He realizes, just like I do, that the King James is God's word, and we can be edified and instructed from it, and we are every week when he preaches. Right. And so he saw that this wasn't a reason to cause division in our church or in our family. And I'm so thankful for his graciousness, and I hope that anybody that I can talk to about this issue, I can model that. Yeah, and that's what I've appreciated about your work also.
Thank you so much, Caleb. That's very kind. And someday I'd love to hear his own story of apparently moving out of a King James only viewpoint. I just always find it so helpful to hear people who can remember what they were thinking. That's my problem. I don't remember what I was thinking when I moved from a King James only to a non-King James only position. It was so gradual and easy for me. It wasn't the wrenching personal difficulty that is for a lot of people. So you, I think, told me that you encountered the work of White and Carson. Tell me the rest of that story.
Yeah, there were just gracious people along the way. I started undergraduate study, and I had at a Christian university, and I had a professor who this was an interesting issue to him, and he talked to us about it. My first day in college, they gave us a NIV Life Application Study Bible. I left it wrapped and sold it on eBay. That's just as interested as I was. But he talked about this issue and was gracious, and I at least saw that people on the other side were godly Christians, and they could study the Bible, and they knew more about the Bible in a lot of areas than I did, and so throwing stones probably wasn't a good idea. Recently, in the last couple years, I have been teaching an adult Sunday school class, started teaching through some books of the Bible, and came to realize that I needed to understand the Bible better. And that's true for all of us. It's certainly true for me. And so I started researching this issue in particular. God laid it on my heart and mind, or it became an interest somehow. And I read Dr. James White, Dr. Carson, their books on the issue, and I was really interested in the text criticism side. More lately, I've encountered your work and realized that that's the more important of the two, text and translation, and I think it's more fruitful when you're having discussions with other people about it too.
Yeah, so I'm not offended at all that you would go to Carson and White, and you're a data analyst. I said this to you before the interview. I'm not 100% surprised that you would go down the textual critical route and actually go through it successfully. But a lot of people that I've encountered, they just couldn't. They just really struggled. This is really difficult stuff. It's complex. And I feel for them. And so I think that the translation angle, at the very least, is the one they ought to explore first. Because you don't have to explore textual criticism if you don't want to. You can use the New King James or the Modern English Version, as I've said 1,000 times. And I think you told me that when you first encountered my work, it just seemed a little bizarre. Like, he's not even talking about text. So
Right.
He's not talking about what I'm interested in, what I need. And again, not offended whatsoever. Very interesting to me. Okay. Praise the Lord. I love that story. I just love it that the great majority of people that I've spoken to who, through listening to me or not, have come out of King James onlyism, they don't anymore hold that doctrine. The great majority of them haven't had to break all the relationships with other Christians. They're, at the very least, able to show gratitude toward the people that shaped them. They see that this is not the only issue there is, and it is not a gospel issue. And you certainly
Right.
fit in that group. So let's turn to, right away, make this a little bit efficient here. Let's turn to the word entreat. And I want to say something here before we get into it. We're going to take us through the same steps. You're going to take us through the same steps. I get proposed false friends on a fairly regular basis, and I do not accept them all. I definitely, a couple of years ago realized I can't just sugarcoat it with people if they're going to say, hey, is this a false friend? I'm going to have to tell them, no, I actually don't think it is. So I would say about half the time people send me a proposed false friend, I'm saying, no, I actually don't think that is a false friend for this reason or that. And I kind of want to preserve the definition of, that I've come up with for this. I recognize this is not the way other linguists use the term false friend. That's fine with me. I've explained why I do it. It's because I think that Elizabethan English and Modern English can be usefully regarded as separate languages, even though I acknowledge that they're not. They overlap a great deal. Usually false friends, that terminology applies to totally different languages, Spanish and English, for example, French and English. But when I have come to hear from folks that, try to expand the category of false friends, I've resisted that for their own good and for mine. False friend isn't a label you can pin on just any old misunderstanding you have of King James English. It is something specific. There's a breadth of I think of the phenomenon, and I'm I think, coming toward the end of the number of truly useful and demonstrable examples of false friends that are really clear. I'm not totally sure, though, and here comes Caleb Richardson sending me emails with totally clear examples of false friends. So I looked carefully, and at least with condemn, or was it entreat? With one of the two, I remember thinking, oh no, I don't think this is one. And then I looked into it and I was like, nope, he's right. This is great. So let's go through entreat. What was the first step? How did this happen? Tell us the narrative.
Well, you're really kind, and I've certainly sent you my share of words that were not false friends for one reason or another, and you've kind of kept me back in bounds, and I've definitely learned along the way, and am learning still. But entreat, I think, is the clearer of the two. Condemn we were a little unsure at first, and actually in the OED, condemn isn't marked archaic. It's it says formerly relating to money or fines. So it doesn't even quite say archaic yet, but it says that portion of the definition is formerly related to that.
And pause. Is it true? I forget now, Caleb, that portion of the OED hasn't been revised since like 1899 or something. That sometimes is the reason why a given word that sure seems, a given sense that sure seems archaic to us or obsolete to us, isn't marked that way because it was still maybe holding on a little bit in that day. Is that the case with this sense of condemn?
That could be. I'm not sure. The definition, I think, actually references this passage, and there wasn't anything more recent than that relating to fines for the word
okay,
condemn.
So that's something to consider, that even if the OED doesn't name something as obsolete, a given sense of a King James word, there are times when you can look and find, oh, that entry is over 100 years old. Or they'll say something a little bit different from obsolete. They'll use something like formerly. And this is not a totally exact science, but those are all factors to consider. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you there. Let's go on with entreat.
So entreat is in the New Testament. It's in 1 Thessalonians. And again, I was reading, as we were ending Chronicles, I'm looking for the next book that we're going to walk through in Sunday school. And I was looking at Thessalonians, and chapter 2, verse 2, Paul says that even after that we had suffered before and were shamefully entreated, as ye know, at Philippi, we were bold in our God to speak unto you the gospel of God with much contention. And reading that in the CSB, I think I was reading it, the phrase that Paul used was outrageously treated. And I knew outrageously is not a King James word. I don't have that passage memorized in any translation, but I knew the King James doesn't use outrageously, at least not there. And so I did that little hover thing in Logos where you can see the other translations. And I saw the word entreated in King James. And so that tipped me off that there's something going on here. In the New Testament, there's a better chance that it could be a text issue. So I think I used your website to see if that was a text issue there.
So let's pause right there.
KJVParallelBible.com.
Right, exactly. So you went to KJV Parallel Bible because you said you don't read Greek and Hebrew. And the initial feeling that a lot of the most responsible King James onlyists have when they encounter a difference among translations, here's a modern translation saying treat, and here's the King James, they know it says entreat. Oh, maybe we're dealing with the critical text here. And that is a possibility that has to be entertained. But if you don't know Greek, you can't check it out for yourself unless you go to the King James Parallel Bible site that I and friends have set up that translates all these differences into English. So you went there and you saw that there is no difference, right?
That's right. No red on the page in that spot. So it's the same text. No disagreement.
The same Greek
TR
text.
and the CT. Yep.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So then where'd you go on from there?
So then I saw, those two words mean different things, at least to me. Entreated means asked or questioned or some proposition. And treated is different. That's how somebody acts toward you. That's their treatment of you. So then I just had to know what the difference is, and so then I dove into the next step in the process, which is to look up the Greek word. And again, I don't have BDAG, but I have whatever tool comes in Logos, and I used what I had there, and it said the Greek word just means treated, not entreated. And so then I knew, I'm possibly on the trail here, that the KJV translators weren't translating a different text. They probably didn't make a mistake. Almost no chance of that. So there's possibly a difference in language.
Right, exactly.
And that's what I found. When I find these differences, just like you say, it's almost always a language change thing, not a mistake on the KJV translator's part.
Right, exactly. Excellent. I am just curious, can you find out what New Testament lexicon you use, even if we have to pause the interview for you to find out in Logos? Because actually one of my big interests here is to try to help people who don't have access to some of the frankly expensive tools that I've invested a lot of my personal funds in. Back when I was making zero money practically, I somehow scraped it all together to get a nice Logos Bible software package to get up to platinum before I came here. Not everybody can do that. So what tool did you have at hand?
PLGNT is what I have, and I think it comes free with Logos. It's Pocket Lexicon to the Greek New Testament.
Okay. That sounds like maybe Suter.
It's Suter, yeah. It's just one guy's name, Alexander Suter, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so I think it's a 19th century resource, which means that it is a responsible original language lexicon, but along with BDB, is going to suffer from some lack of advance in scholarship since then. We're talking about incredibly minor stuff, typically. So if that's what you're going to have access to, that's still good. But for example, what that resource wouldn't yet have taken account of, likely, if I'm remembering correctly, are the discovery of papyri, in the sands of Egypt, where we can actually look and see how some common words of the New Testament were used in common life. And that provides at least an extra flavor for our understanding, and sometimes gives us some specifics that were really, really helpful. So, okay, you went to the original language lexicon, that's step 2, and found kind of what you expected to find, right? Pick up the story from where you left off, and I interrupted you.
No, exactly. It's what I expected, because all the modern translations are saying treated, including the New King James has that. I forget if it's treated or a word that just means treated. So I knew it's not text. KJV translators probably didn't make a mistake here. And the Greek lexicon that I have backs that up, that it's all kind of aligning to say that that's what this Greek word means. That's what all the modern translations have. And so there's a potential that English has just changed since the 1600s, or there's a meaning for entreated that I'm not used to hearing. But
Right.
That wasn't the case. So I moved to step 3, which was looking at the current dictionaries, and they just don't have any definition that means treated. It all means a request, a proposition.
Yeah, my son entreated me. Please, Dad, let me play video games this morning. That's how we would use entreat. It has this feel of being a little, formal or literary, maybe,
Yeah.
but you would definitely see it. It's still definitely a current word that, at least educated people, even just, high school educated people who read any newspaper, they would know that word, and that's the meaning that they would get out of it, right? Okay, so the contemporary dictionaries told you what you expected, and at this point, you feel like, man, I don't even need to look at the OED, because you just know what you're going to see. But we went ahead and together, went down this path. So take us to that 4th step.
Yeah, and from the context, that's exactly what I saw too, was Paul is either being treated or he's being asked. I could see either one of those fitting in the context. But yeah, the old dictionaries bear that up also. I actually looked at, again, Webster's 1828 first, and it does list this. It doesn't use the word archaic or obsolete, but it says not current. This is not a current usage of the word for this sense. And it says that the sense is to treat, to discourse, not used. So that's what Paul meant. And I think, if I'm remembering right, Webster's, again, quotes this passage and says that this is not a current sense of the word. Again, I don't have the OED, but I sent it to you and you confirmed.
I confirmed it, and Webster was on the very same wavelength. He he's practicing lexicography the way it's practiced today. There have been advances, sure. Not everything that happens is an advance all the time, of course. But when I read Webster's intro to his Bible, he's saying exactly what I'm saying about the changes in English. So it's fascinating that, about half of the King James's life ago,
Yep.
Webster is seeing false friends also. He knows a lot of his readership is going to be reading the King James, and so he's including this sense, I'm going to presume, quite, for the purpose of helping King James readers. Again, we're not making this up. It's not a new thing. This is a very old thing, seen in somebody whose resource, the 1828 Webster's, is commonly promoted among users of the King James. So we confirmed this in the OED also. Why don't you read the King James verse again, and then let's make sure we understand what it says.
So again, here Paul writing to the Thessalonians, talking about how he was treated in Philippi when he was there. He says, "But even after that we had suffered before and were shamefully entreated, as you know, at Philippi, we were bold in our God to speak unto you the gospel of God with much contention." So the context to me could really go either way. He could say somebody's
Right.
making a shameful request of us
Right.
at Philippi, but that's not what he said. He said we were treated badly, which they were at Philippi.
Right, right. Yeah, this is why I think you were saying this is a clearer example, because
Yep.
although with condemn, someone could misread that and use the current sense. We're predicting, you and I, who are trying to, have a well-informed linguistic gut here, that most people are just going to be confused, and
Yep.
then they're they're going to kind of get the overall gist from context anyway, and probably they're going to be mostly okay.
Right.
There's some kind of penalty laid on the land, and they read past it. But with this one, you're going to hit it, and you're going to be genuinely unsure. Okay, did they ask? What is a shameful entreaty? Like asking him questions that they shouldn't be asking? What does that mean? And it's this odd thing, because that just doesn't fit well in context. You can't think of a time when that occurred. So you're just kind of drawing a blank. I do think that most contemporary readers would be misled by this one, and it is therefore even more properly called a false friend. And here comes my sound effect again, cha-ching, da-ding, whatever it is. You win. This is fantastic. And what I've tried to demonstrate here in this interview, and thank you so much for helping me with this, Caleb, is that you can use my methods, and you don't even have to have all my resources. I have expensive resources. That's my job and calling. They're helpful, but you can use the tools available to you to come to the same conclusions. And what's so heartening to me, Caleb, is that you don't have to know Greek and Hebrew to be able to triangulate the way that you've done. There are times when that is really helpful for clarifying what's going on in a given obscure passage. But these two examples you were able to discover and verify without being able to read Hebrew, when one of them was in Hebrew, without being able to read Greek, and the other one was in the Greek in the New Testament. And I wasn't totally confident that this was possible, to be frank. I was a little worried over time that people just, maybe I was assuming knowledge without really realizing it, that people just didn't have. So you've really encouraged me with these. You've added to my stock of false friends. I've got an even bigger file folder now, and keep them coming. Thank you so much, Caleb, for your time, and may the Lord bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.
Quick little follow-up here. Caleb actually contacted the OED editors about their guidelines for using the word formerly, as they did in the entry for the word condemn, especially with the penalty expressed as condemned to death, condemned to be beheaded, formerly also in a fine or forfeiture. When did you use formerly, he said. Is there any date or recency associated with its use? Could readers expect to encounter this sense in modern literature? And that's the key. Would anybody who's just been exposed to English as it's currently spoken and written understand the word condemned in a sense like this one, described as formerly? Why didn't they say obsolete or something? They answer, "Thank you for your email. Apologies for our very delayed reply. How elegant, how courteous of those Brits. They're so wonderful. To answer your question, if something is described using formerly, we wouldn't expect a reader to encounter it in modern literature, but they may find it in historical works. It's fair to say that dating usage isn't an exact science. That is just so true. So formerly is intentionally unspecific. On balance, we consider that better than asserting a precise date range which we can't substantiate without having viewed all available evidence. We hope this helps. Kind regards, the Oxford Languages team." Isn't that so great? I love that email. It's elegant. It's all perfectly punctuated and, written so well. And isn't this true? You can't assert a precise date range, not when you don't have all the available evidence. And I think with something so obscure as this, and with so many questions to track down when it comes to the history of the English language, that's just not likely to happen. So I think we can take the word formerly as a somewhat tentative way of saying, in their judgment, probably that sense is obsolete. Once again, I think we have a false friend.